Welcome back, coaches. We're going to talk more about mobility, and we're going to get a little bit specific with some tools and technique and some deeper thoughts on mobility work. So, first thing to consider is timing. So, it is nice to include mobility with built-in existing workout time. And so, for coaching, that doesn't necessarily mean it's your job to always do that. But when coaching people on their like weekly schedule and stuff, or trying to get people to work mobility into their lives, it can be useful to suggest that they do it before or after a workout time, because it's just otherwise hard to do like independent of other workout stuff. And if people are doing it like in front of or on the back of a workout class or something, I think that just makes adherence a lot better. The other thing is that we talked about that warm smash stretch. So if people are doing it after class, they're already warmed up. However, mobility done before can often be really useful. So if people are doing mobility before a workout, it should be shorter. They should spend more time being in active stretch and focus smashes, and it should be aimed at preparing tissues for a specific task. So general longer sessions of smashing and stretching are just going to make things real sleepy and not really help anything super specific. So an example of this would be like if we're working on push-up mobility and we wanted to do some sort of help for that bottom of push-up position, we could hit some sort of front of shoulder smash. So I was thinking about post stretch. So you can imagine this is a post to like a squat rack, and we're getting the front of the shoulder on that. Ideally, this would be like fairly easy to do because you don't need to grab anything. You can just put the front of your shoulder into a post and then work through some of the range of motion that you're going to be hitting. And maybe you just do like a minute of that per side. You could have a ball in between you and the post. That would make things a little more focused. Great. We're at home just to continue to give examples. The outside corner of a wall or door will work. And then we could just spend some time in our press stretch. So that's just pulling ourselves into that bottom of push-up. So sometimes I'll call these push-up bottom rocks or something, where I'm getting into that position I'm going to go for, and I'm just overstretching it a little bit and doing some activity where I'm screwing my hand into the floor, pressing my hand into the floor, and then releasing, and just generally being more active and working in the range of motion I'm trying to improve for my push-ups. After a workout, that's a time when we can do some longer, more general smashing and more time in relaxed stretches. So an example of this might be baby crawl and couch stretch, which is one of my favorite combinations because just about everyone needs it. So I've got a foam roller here, thinking about working my entire quad. Baby crawl just sort of refers to this swiveling of the hips side to side so that I'm getting some inner thigh, some outer thigh, and across the muscle fibers. And I'm not working anything super specific. I'm just focused on addressing tightness in the thighs and hip flexors. And so I'm going to spend some time working this entire muscle group and just sort of exploring and getting some refreshing stuff in there. And then couch stretch, I'm going to do on an actual couch, by gosh. Normally I would do this in a corner where the floor meets the wall. Have my knee on a ab mat or something. But then I'm just working on stretching this entire quad and hip flexor complex and doing some activation around that. So that would be a good example of something I wouldn't necessarily recommend before a workout because it's just going to put everything to sleep. Maybe small amounts of that, very specifically focused on something. So there we go, timing. The next tool or technique is test retest. So I'm throwing this out early because it's a way to measure and get some sense of how effective various mobility interventions can be. So let's talk about calf and narrow stance squat. So let's say I'm going to mobilize my calf. calf is responsible for ankle mobility in many ways. Ankle mobility is a little bit separate as well. But so let's say I'm going to mobilize my calf and I want to see what it's helping with. So I can do a test before I start anything. I can do a test in the middle, and then I can do a test at the end. And what we're going to look at is a narrow stance squat. So with my feet right together, I'm going to do a squat. Keeping heels down. For me, I have complete ankle range of motion in that, so I'm able to go all the way down. I could look at things like how neutral am I able to keep my pelvis and spine through that. It's pretty impossible to go full depth narrow squat and not have some rounding through the lower back, but I could see if I could improve that. But for me, I'm more thinking about how does this feel side to side? Is there pressure on my knees? And does it feel about even? So a good thing to think about is if, let's say, my left knee feels a little bit more sensitive or vulnerable, I'm going to start on the left and see if I can improve that. So then I'm going to go through and smash and stretch my left calf and ankle. So just really quickly, a couple different ways to do that. Any sort of crossbar, so you can have a barbell on the floor, usually up on like some 5s or something is going to be great, but something really focused that I don't have to work very hard to get a lot of pressure into. So then this is just an example. I'm just going back and forth. At home, maybe you could be on the floor with a stack of books. And the idea is that the pressure, the implement is focused enough that we don't have to work very hard to feel like, oh, that's enough. And I can move my ankle through a full range of motion. So we can talk more about that. I'm not giving a lot of specifics in terms of mobility, smashes, and stretches to do throughout this. I want you to more have the ideas, and you can always come ask me in person or look stuff up. It's pretty easy to find a bunch of ideas around, say you're trying to smash and stretch your lats. I bet you could search that on YouTube or the internet and find something. But these ideas will give you some better senses of how to use those techniques. So, all right, so I did some smashing. I'm going to do some stretching. I'll talk more about this later. I'm going to do this like toes up the wall stretch. So stretch, stretch, stretch. Now I've really affected this left calf. I'm going to redo my narrow stance squat and see how I feel. So now I have a variable side that I've worked on. I have a control side that I've done nothing to. I can see how that position has changed. This narrow stance squat means I have to have a lot of dorsiflexion through my ankle. So if I've improved my calf and ankle mobility, chances are I've improved how this is going to feel on my knee in that narrow stance squat. Now I could go through, do the other side, and then retest again at the end and make sure things are feeling more or less balanced. But if I start with the side that felt less good, and then after working on it, it feels better than the other side, then I know I've made some really good progress. And just that before and after of doing one side, testing, and then doing the other side is really quite powerful in terms of teaching ourselves what effect this mobility work can have on our body and on feelings of strength and stability in these ranges of motion that we're working on, functional ranges of motion. Okay, great. So let's talk a little bit more about smashing. So smashing usually is done on large muscle groups. We don't really want to be smashing into like the side of the knee or like the bones of the ankle necessarily. There are places where like scraping and some slightly more gentle forms of smashing can be effective there, but in general we're talking about like muscle groups. So quads, the hamstrings, the calves, the biceps, the triceps, back muscles, glutes, etc. We want to think about spending 3 to 5 minutes per area. So one example would be the quad. I showed the baby crawl, and I'll show a little bit more of that. So the quad is actually like 4 muscles, and if we're working inner and outer thigh as well, we could spend like 10 minutes per side potentially. So maybe we don't have that kind of time, but if we just go over things for like a minute or two, again, it might feel nice and it might not be time wasted exactly, but we're not gonna like really break up things that are stuck in that amount of time. We're looking at 2-3+ minutes on like a muscle to have any sort of change. So on a really small focused area, maybe 2 or 3 minutes is enough. On something like a calf or a hamstring, probably 3 to 5 is more realistic. So a couple things about smashing. I like to do an exploratory sort of pass and see where things are tightest. So working over the whole area, I can say, oh, like it all feels pretty even, or oh no, there's this one spot that I really need to work on. From there, I'm going to try to work the whole thing. So from above the knee to below the hip, maybe even up into the hip a little bit. I'm going to try to work this entire muscle, more or less. Maybe I'll focus on some spots. And a couple things to consider. If I'm working the whole muscle like this, I'm not really allowing anything to relax. And that's the goal of smashing, is to release that tension. If we hold tension in the muscles the whole time, we're not actually letting them succumb, become supple, conform to the roller, and we're not really gonna like get that separation of the fibers and the different packets and make sure everything's sliding smoothly. So one way to work a little bit more specifically is to go across the muscle fibers. That's gonna help get the various packets of muscle sliding smoothly against each other. So also it's harder to like stay tight and like do this too quickly. So if I'm moving across the muscle fibers and then slowly moving up or down, that tends to help me to relax. Another thing we can do is just move really slowly with a focus on relaxing. So a really slow longitudinal movement will work as long as we're really focused on releasing the tension through that muscle. Talk a little bit more about that PNF, contract, relax, and breathe stuff, which will be helpful. But there you go. Stretch. So if we're talking about stretching, ideal stretching is about 2 minutes. So it's a little bit less variable in that if we're trying to smash a lot of different packets of muscle, we have to spend more time. Stretching, we're just putting things under tension and allowing the tissues to elongate. So 2 minutes of decent tension is how long it takes things to change on the level of the cell and tissue. So for example, we talked about that calf stretch. It can be necessary to sort of get specific about what we're trying to stretch. So the example of the calf, there's these two muscles. There's the gastrocnemius, which is this more visible upper calf that passes the knee. And then there's the soleus, which is a little bit underneath and lower profile. So if my knee is locked, I'm more stretching that gastrocnemius. So my heel is in and pressing my hips forward. That's pretty much only stretching the gastroc or gastrocnemius, which is great if I'm trying to affect knee pain or something like that. However, if I'm trying to work on my squat where my knee is bent, I actually have to bend the knee, put some slack into the gastrocnemius, and then press my knee forward to affect the soleus. So I can also be pretty active here, so I can be moving side to side. I can be exploring in that range of motion. I can be taking deep breaths. All of these things are just going to help the time pass a little bit better. They're also going to get into some of those smaller muscles and tissues and help to sort of spread that stretch around. So, yeah, I think the calf is a good idea or a good example of that. 2 minutes of stretch, which seems like an awfully long time. Most people want to stretch for like 30 seconds and be done, which again might not be time wasted, but it's not going to help actually change range of motion over time. 2 to 3 minutes of stretching regularly is going to help. So again, warm, smash, stretch. The smashing is going to make a big difference. It's going to help with that stretch. The big one here, I mean, we've probably all heard of stretching before. And you've probably heard of proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation before. This contract, relax, and breathe mobility crab is a game changer in my opinion. It just is going to make the time spent smashing and stretching a lot more effective and pass more quickly with a lot less discomfort. So let's go back to our smashing of the quad. So I have a foam roller. Let's say I have a very sturdy foam roller and it's pretty intense. I'm going to do some contract, relax, and breathe. Contract, relax, and breathe is essentially that proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation where if I activate the agonist to the muscle I'm trying to work on, it's going to then send a signal to that muscle to relax. And again, our body can hold a lot of tension, and that's going to be counterproductive to our mobility work. We're actually trying to release the tension. So activating the muscle we're trying to work on, and then that will help relax it. That's PNF. It's using the the Golgi apparatus and the stretch, the tense. I don't remember the names exactly. Golgi. I know that's one of them, but it's basically like there's these things that sense tension, and they sense them in the muscle, and then they sense them in the opposing muscle, and we are just using those. We're kind of exploiting those signals to help make progress in this mobility. So. I think it's great to know all that stuff if you have to pass a test. It's also good to know it just in terms of like knowing why this stuff is effective. But if we can just think, contract, relax, and breathe and sort of know what that means, it's going to help us in a more practical manner. So in the instance of the quad smash, so I've got my left quad loaded up. I'm going to first contract the quad. So I'm pointing my toe. I could be pushing this toe into the floor. I'm actively pushing the roller out of the quad. I am then going to take a deep breath in, filling my hips, breathing down into my thigh muscles. That's going to also brace me through the core, which we never really want to be substituting stretch or smash in a muscle for movement at the core or like a sagging of the core or anything. We want to be working these things in a braced neutral spinal position most of the time. So pressing in, breathing in, doing some bracing. I'm going to hold that for 3 or 4 seconds. 3, 2, 1, and then I'm going to do a long, slow exhale. That long, slow, controlled exhale is me telling my nervous system, I'm doing this on purpose. We're okay. I've got this. You can trust me. So just a really long, controlled exhale. While I'm doing that exhale, I'm actively trying to release that tension and invite the roller into my thigh muscle. So contract. I'm pushing the roller out with my thigh muscle, pointing my toe, pressing my toe towards the floor, all that stuff. Breathe, bracing through the core, breathing deep down into my hips and thigh, holding. That allows some of those muscle fibers and sensors to fatigue, and then long, slow exhale, relaxation, trying to exhale all that tension, inviting the roller deep in. Now, here comes the floss. Ready for it? Ooh, baby. I am still trying to relax my quad, and then I'm moving my knee through a range of motion. That is taking my thigh muscle through the point of compression. So it's kind of like using a pasta roller or something. I am also activating my hamstring, which is then having the effect of that activation of the hamstring is telling my quad to relax. So contract, breathe, relax, decontract, I guess. Stay relaxed, floss. So a number of things are happening, and hopefully that's fairly simple to remember. Contract, relax, breathe, and floss. Flossing isn't always possible. Yes, so let's talk about a stretch that we could do. So we can apply this contract, relax, and breathe to a stretch. So let's do something for the hamstring. So here's one possibility. It's a forward fold with a lockout. So just doing this good morning is essentially flossing my hamstring. It's just taking it through a range of motion. So if I pause here, I'm on stretch. Now, if I was to grab onto my shins or maybe a strap or even my own toes, I could pull against that. That's going to be activating my hamstrings. So pulling against that is my contract. I can take a deep breath into my abdomen. I can think about pulling my spine towards neutral. I can hold that pull and that breath for 3, 2, 1. Then on a long, slow exhale, I'm just trying to release all that tension. And maybe I can slide just a little bit deeper into that stretch. I could also do some movement at my hip and or knee. So maybe I could do some cycles of this. So that would be one possible contract, relax, and breathe. And a good example of this is just that forward fold with that halfway lift. I'm basically accomplishing the same thing. Forward fold, halfway lift, I'm activating my hamstrings. And then once I've used my hamstrings, it's a lot easier to release the tension in the hamstrings. So another possible way to do this would be something where I'm doing some sort of stretch out here. I could pull against my hamstring or activate my hamstring to pull against my foot. Deep breath in, relax, a little bit more stretch, and then I could do my floss that way, where I'm contracting my quad to pull my toe up. So I think the basic idea is that we're contracting the muscle we want to use or we want to lengthen or smash or release for a while to exhaust its defensive tension. And then we try to release the tension. And then if we can activate the opposite muscle or move a nearby joint through a range of motion, that's going to help just sort of make that stretch or smash much more functional, because it's going to be affecting a position or a range of motion that we actually want to use, which brings me to my next point. So from contract, relax, and breathe and floss, work in a position you want to improve. So ideally, if we're doing this, great. This is stretching my bicep and my wrist. This is not a position I'm going to use very often. I'm not going to be doing some sort of weird seal plank. So this would be an example of working in a position that is not that functional or that we're not really trying to improve. An example of like getting back to that front of shoulder thing. So if I have a ball, I could lie on the floor, put that ball in front of my shoulder, and I could do some good smashing here. Great. Love it. I could get my arm out here. I could do some stretching here. How often am I doing an exercise or trying to hold something with my arm either just straight by my side, sometimes yes, or my arm way back here? Those are not positions that I'm necessarily trying to improve that often. However, let's say I have a PVC, or I have a foam roller and a ball, or I have that post we talked about earlier in a ball. Now I can do some work on the front of my shoulder, and I have the ability to move through this press position, bottom of push-up, top of row. I could still move out to the side. I can also go overhead. So I'm addressing these like anterior deltoid, pectoralis, and some of the other nearby stuff, as well as the connective tissue there. And yes, I could just smash this, but if I am applying pressure there and then I'm working towards my overhead or I'm working towards my bottom of push-up, top of row, then I'm really making sure that I'm going to affect the positions I want to improve. So, and it's similar to like how a seated knee extension, just like boop, boop, is not as functional as a front squat or a squat. There you go. Last concept, above and below a joint. So let's talk about knee pain. We've talked about that before. So you have pain in your knee. Someone has pain in their knee, let's say during a squat. It's not that uncommon. So we have almost no ability to deal with joint mechanics. There are a few things that we can do that will deal with joint mechanics, fluid in the joint, torn meniscus, tendonitis, like all those things are kind of outside of general coaching scope of practice. However, tension in the muscles and connective tissue above and below that joint can play a significant role in what kinds of pressures are happening in the joint. So let's say my inner thigh is tight. It's going to put pressure on this side of the joint. It's going to tend to want to make the joint collapse that way, putting additional strain on like a meniscus, on a medial tendon, blah, blah, blah. You get the idea. I kind of like to think of it as though, you know, if you have a tent pole and you have these different wires going out and like one wire is just brutally tight, that's going to make that tent pole want to bend and put weird pressures on it. That is kind of what's happening when the muscles are imbalanced or something is tight. And, you know, we can't always deal with the long-term stuff of like, well, why is it tight in the first place? What kind of form stuff was happening to like injure this in the first place or whatever. That's a different story. But we could potentially give some thought to like, all right, your knee is hurting in the squat. You have some time. This has been happening for a week or two. Let's try some foam rolling here. Let's try some calf smashing up in this area, you know, targeting the gastrocnemius and some of these connective tissues that cross the knee. We're not going to, again, smash the knee. We're not going to smash behind the knee. We're not going to smash the kneecap. We're going to smash everything else. And usually that will make some difference. So it's a little trial and error, but, you know, really pain is very mysterious in most cases, and almost everything is trial and error. Even like imaging stuff is still kind of trial and error. They can see damage, they know there's pain, they're correlating most of the time. So we can know that there's some discomfort, something feels tight or not right. We can say, well, here's the thing to try. Maybe before you squat next time, let's hit the foam roller, let's do some like inner thigh or outer thigh smashing. You know, and there might be indications like, yeah, I feel tight in the outside of my knee. Well, let's try, you know, smashing some of this like outer thigh stuff and see if that helps. Let's try, you know, get a lacrosse ball in this part of your shin calf thing and see if that helps. And again, using all those techniques, and you may find that you know, try this on yourself first. Coach thyself, I think, is a good place to start. So you have discomfort in something. You know, we're looking above and below. So elbow pain, we're looking at forearm, we're looking at tricep, bicep. Shoulder pain, we're probably looking at all this stuff because there's so much stuff upstream from the shoulder, but it could also be, there could be some of this upper arm stuff contributing. You know, low back, we're looking at glutes, we're looking at obliques and like QL, erector spinae, stuff like that. So above and below a point of pain is generally pretty safe to like do some mobility work and see what happens. You know, there you go. Mobility tools and techniques. Good luck out there.